The sky burned red as the fleet of invaders descended. Thousands of ships, sleek and menacing, filled the heavens like a swarm of locusts, an unstoppable force moving toward Earth. Among the chaos, one ship stood defiant, the Resolute. Its engines sputtered, its hull scratched and scarred from years of warfare, but it still carried humanity's hopes. Inside the bridge, Commander Juno Walker gripped the console, her knuckles white with tension. The alarm screamed around her, but her face remained calm. She had seen worse. "Prepare the missile array," she ordered, her voice unwavering despite the impending destruction. "We're not going down without a fight." Lieutenant Victor Reyes, standing just a few feet away, exchanged a tense glance with her. He was the youngest officer aboard, but the fire in his eyes betrayed his inexperience. "Commander, we're outgunned. Our chances—" "I know," Juno interrupted, her gaze fixed on the forward screen. The invaders' fleet loomed closer. "But if we don't fight, they'll slaughter everyone. Earth, our families, everything we've built." She clenched her fist. "We're not letting that happen." The Resolute's crew had been in constant battle for months, their resources drained, and their morale stretched thin. Each day, the odds seemed more impossible. But Juno refused to give up. She had inherited her father's legacy, and she would die with his name intact. Dr. Arya Chin, a scientist who had joined the Resolute after the first wave of attacks, stood at the back of the room, eyes glued to a small tablet. She adjusted her glasses, frustration creeping across her brow. "Commander, the engine stabilizers are on the verge of failing. We have minutes before this ship won't even be able to move." Juno's gaze shifted, but only for a second. Her next words were deliberate, each one heavy with purpose. "Then we make those minutes count." The crew snapped into action. Reyes moved quickly to the missile console, furiously typing in coordinates. "I'm locking on their lead ship." "But Commander, if we fire now, we'll be sitting ducks for their next wave." "Do it," she ordered. "We'll worry about the next wave when we're still here to face it." A hushed silence filled the bridge as Reyes initiated the sequence. In the background, the low rumble of the engines shook the walls, and the faint smell of burnt metal stung the air. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. Juno took a deep breath. She wasn't a religious woman, but as the missiles fired, she couldn't help but feel like she was sending humanity's final prayer into the void. The Resolute lurched as the missile barrage struck the enemy flagship, sparks flashing across the screen. But it wasn't enough. The flagship held firm. "Impact, no significant damage," Reyes muttered under his breath, frustration clear in his voice. "They were ready for us," Juno said quietly. "But they haven't seen what's coming next." Outside the ship, the invader fleet closed in for the kill. Their victory seemed inevitable, their firepower overwhelming. But as the red sky darkened and the ship continued to tremble, Juno's mind raced. "We're still alive," she said, voice tinged with fierce resolve. "And as long as we are, we fight. We'll show them why humanity's the last thing they should have underestimated." Dr. Chin, now standing by a makeshift terminal, looked up, her voice cautious but determined. "There's one more option, Commander. It's risky, but it could cripple their fleet." Juno's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Chin hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "The Resolute has an experimental weapon. It's never been tested in combat, but if we reroute the energy—" "Do it," Juno interrupted. "We'll take the risk. It's the only chance we've got." As the tension on the bridge mounted, the crew braced for the next moment that could change everything, or end them all. And in the shadow of the enemy fleet, Juno knew they were about to discover if humanity's will was enough to turn the tide. The seconds ticked by like hours. Juno stood at the bridge's viewport, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The enemy fleet, vast and imposing, loomed ahead. The massive ships were closing in, their sleek hulls reflecting the eerie red glow of the dying sun. The once vibrant earth below now seemed so far away, so fragile beneath the crushing weight of this alien threat. "Ready the experimental weapon," she commanded, her voice calm despite the tension choking the air. Dr. Chen moved swiftly to the terminal, fingers flying across the holographic interface. "You're sure about this?" Reyes asked, his voice laced with doubt. "We've never even tested it. If this fails, it's our only chance." Juno cut him off. She glanced over her shoulder. "We're already dead if we don't take it. Activate it." Reyes nodded reluctantly. "Initiating now." The ship vibrated as the power systems hummed to life, a strange, low frequency shaking the walls. Juno felt it in her bones, a subtle but unmistakable pulse. It was the weapon, an untested, volatile energy core that had never been activated in battle. But it was humanity's final weapon, and they would unleash it or perish. "We've got about 2 minutes until the fleet's in range," Chin called out, her voice steady but tight with anxiety. "The core is charging. But if we don't fire before they get too close, we won't have the power to send the burst." Juno turned back to the viewport, scanning the darkening sky. The invader ships were close now, too close. Their formations were perfect, methodical. They had planned this assault for months, maybe longer. They were relentless, and every single one of them believed humanity was a relic, a dying species unworthy of survival. The hum of the core intensified, now vibrating through the entire ship. Reyes looked up at Juno, his face a mixture of hope and fear. "We're ready, Commander." The countdown began, the seconds slicing through the silence like a blade. 10, 9, 8. "Everyone brace yourselves," Juno muttered under her breath, her hands tightening on the console. The crew was silent, each member fully aware that their fate was now sealed by the next decision. If the weapon worked, they might have a chance. If it didn't, they were finished. 7, 6. "I just hope it's enough," Reyes whispered, barely audible over the rising hum. His eyes never left the console. "I don't care if it's enough," Juno said, her voice firm. "We fight because it's all we've ever known." The final number appeared on the console, blinking like a warning light. 1. Juno didn't wait for anyone's approval. "Fire!" The ship shook violently as the core unleashed its power. A brilliant surge of energy erupted from the rear, a wave of radiant light that shot toward the invader fleet. The entire ship rattled, and the force was almost unbearable, like the universe itself was bending under the strain. For a split second, everything went still. Then came the explosion. The shockwave hit with an overwhelming roar, the ship jerking violently as the blast collided with the closest enemy ship. The target vessel disintegrated in a flash of fire and energy, scattering debris in all directions. The impact was enough to momentarily disrupt the formation of the enemy fleet, throwing their ships into chaos. "We've hit them!" Reyes gasped, eyes wide in disbelief. "We've actually..." But Juno's smile was brief, and it was a weary one. "Not enough. Not yet." The enemy wasn't finished. More ships rallied, quickly regaining their formation. A new wave of weapons systems powered up, aimed directly at the Resolute. The brief hope of victory evaporated in an instant, replaced by the crushing certainty that their survival was still uncertain. Juno's mind raced. She had expected this, of course. No single weapon could end a war. But as the first wave of enemy fire surged toward them, a new plan began to form. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she barked. "And get those missile batteries back online. We're not finished yet." The fate of humanity rested in their hands. And Juno Walker wouldn't let it go without a fight. The bridge of the Resolute was a quiet, tense battlefield. The seconds felt like hours as Juno paced, eyes locked on the tactical display. The enemy had regrouped faster than she anticipated. Their ships had adapted, regrouping after the first blast, and now they were closing in, their weapons systems powering up again. It was a small victory, but one that wouldn't last. "How long until we can fire the experimental weapon again?" Juno asked, her voice tight but controlled. She didn't have time for any more uncertainty. "We need at least 5 minutes," Chen answered without looking up, her fingers moving swiftly over the terminal. "The core is still cycling, and the energy drain from that last shot was significant." Juno's eyes flashed with impatience, but she said nothing. 5 minutes felt like a lifetime, and they had no time to waste. A glance at Reyes, standing near the control panel, confirmed her worst fear. The enemy was too close, and their firepower was overwhelming. They needed a new plan, and fast. Reyes, she called, her voice firm but almost gentle. I need something else from you. Any ideas? Reyes, as calm as ever despite the chaos, turned to her. His face was drawn, the weight of leadership pressing on his shoulders. You're asking the wrong person, Commander, he said, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his lips. But we could try a decoy maneuver. Buy ourselves some time. How? Let me hack into their targeting systems. If I can scramble their lock, it'll throw their aim off for a few minutes, maybe longer. It's risky, but it's the only shot we have. Juno considered it for a moment, watching the enemy ships move into position. She could already hear the hum of the weapons charging, feel the anticipation of the oncoming battle. They would not last long under a concentrated fire. Do it, she ordered. We don't have a choice. Reyes nodded, already moving to the console. His fingers flew over the keys, and a soft hum filled the room as his system interfaced with the enemy fleet's communications network. Seconds passed. Then, with a low beep, Reyes straightened, his eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and relief. Done, he said. I've sent out a signal, disrupting their targeting algorithms. They'll be firing blind for a few minutes. Juno didn't waste a second. Prepare evasive maneuvers. Get us out of here. The ship jolted as the engines fired, sending the Resolute into a sharp, spiraling climb. The sound of the ship's hull groaning under the strain filled the air, but Juno didn't flinch. Every move was calculated, every turn meant to avoid the incoming fire. The ship felt alive in those moments, her heartbeat, her thoughts, all aligned with the rhythm of the battle. Seconds later, enemy fire exploded in the space they'd just vacated, the shockwaves shaking the ship with force. The displays flickered, but they held steady. A small sigh of relief escaped Juno's lips, but it was quickly followed by renewed determination. We've got 5 minutes before they regain control of their targeting systems, Reyes warned, his voice laced with urgency. It's not much time. I know, Juno replied. But it's all we need. She turned her gaze back to the viewport, watching as the enemy ships began to realign. They were moving fast, but she could see the disarray, each ship out of sync with the others. Their reaction time was delayed. This was their chance. Focus all energy on the experimental weapon, she ordered. We fire again when we have the perfect shot. I want to make every second count. As the core's hum filled the air once more, Juno could feel the weight of her command pressing down on her. The responsibility, the hope of humanity, was on her shoulders. But she was ready. And this time, she was going to make the enemy feel the full force of human resilience. Target locked, Chen announced. Ready, Juno muttered to herself. Fire! The wave of energy surged again, the ship quaking with the release. This time, the blast was precise. The shockwave hit the heart of the enemy fleet, ripping through their central formation. One by one, ships exploded in flashes of light. It wasn't enough to win the war, but it was a victory. And victories, no matter how small, were something humanity knew how to build upon. Juno took a breath, her resolve hardening. This wasn't over yet, but she wasn't about to let them take Earth without a fight. The hum of the Resolute's engines filled the air, but the atmosphere on the bridge was heavy with anticipation. The enemy fleet was scattered, their formation shattered by the devastating blast. Still, Juno knew this was far from over. They had only delayed the inevitable, not defeated it. The remaining ships were regrouping, preparing for one last assault that could crush humanity's fragile hope. Status report, Juno barked, her eyes flicking to the tactical screen. We've inflicted significant damage, Chen replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. 2 of their flagship destroyers are gone. Several smaller ships are disabled. But they're still coming at us, Commander. They're regrouping faster than we expected. Juno's jaw tightened. She was aware of their tenacity. The alien fleet had been relentless from the beginning. But humanity had something they didn't: the will to survive. "What's our status on the weapon?" she asked, turning toward Reyes, who was monitoring the experimental energy core. Reyes didn't look up, his fingers dancing across the console. "The core is charging again, but it's unstable. It'll take at least 15 minutes to fully recharge. We can't fire until it's stable." 15 minutes. That was all they had before the enemy closed in. Juno's heart raced. The clock was ticking, and their margin for error was shrinking by the second. "Can we hold them off that long?" Juno asked, her voice laced with urgency. Rhea's eyes met hers. "We can try, but the shields are weak. I'd say we have 10 minutes at best before they break through." The realization hit her like a slap in the face. She was running out of time. Running out of options. But surrender was not an option. Not yet. "Activate the forward turrets," she ordered, pacing back and forth. "We'll buy ourselves those extra minutes." The crew snapped to attention as they worked in unison, the air crackling with the tension of the impending battle. The forward turrets of the Resolute powered up, their cannons glowing a fierce red as they locked onto the enemy ships. The first volley of fire erupted, streaking toward the oncoming enemy fleet. Explosions rippled through the void, lighting up the darkness. But the enemy pressed on, their ships closing the gap. "We're running out of time," Chen murmured, watching the tactical display with a growing sense of dread. Juno's eyes were fixed on the advancing ships. Her mind raced, weighing her options. She could feel the weight of leadership bearing down on her. Every decision mattered now, and the lives of everyone on this ship were in her hands. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Juno ordered, her voice calm but resolute. "Get us close to their lead ship. If we can disable their command center, we'll break their coordination." "Understood," Reyes said, already programming the necessary commands. As the Resolute tilted and banked, rocketing toward the enemy flagship, Juno's grip tightened on the console. Every inch they gained brought them closer to a singular moment, the moment where they could either win or lose it all. 5 minutes, Reyes said, his voice tight. "The weapon will be ready soon." Juno's heart pounded in her chest. The pressure was unbearable, but she held her ground. Her fingers brushed against the worn surface of the command chair, grounding herself. "We're not losing this fight," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "We're human. And we never give up." Her words lingered in the air, a promise that ignited the crew's resolve. The countdown had begun. The final act was upon them. Suddenly, the enemy flagship unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, and the ship rocked violently. Sparks flew from the console as the lights flickered. "We need that weapon now!" Juno shouted, her pulse racing. Reyes' fingers flew over the console, sweat beading on his brow. The ship shook again, but this time it wasn't from the enemy fire. The core hummed, vibrating with raw energy, ready to unleash its power. "Ready," Reyes said, his voice filled with equal parts fear and excitement. Juno steadied herself, staring at the enemy's flagship through the viewport. "Fire!" The energy blast tore through the silence of space, a blinding beam of concentrated force. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The light from the shot consumed the screen, and then the enemy flagship was gone. Juno allowed herself a single breath, but before she could savor the victory, the screen flickered again, and another wave of enemy ships emerged from the shadows. It was far from over.